It was early November 1572 in the French village of Dole. 3 peasants were walking home from work one evening. They were crossing a meadow when they heard the terrified screams of a girl, clearly in agony, and what sounded like the growling of a wolf. They rushed towards the screams and they came upon a horrifying sight. A 10-year-old girl was in the clutches of some kind of terrible beast. This thing was hunched over her, biting into her body and tearing off huge strips of flesh. The peasants shouted and the beast ran away on all 4s into a nearby woodland. The girl quickly succumbed to her injuries and died shortly after the attack. She had become another victim of the Werewolf of Dole. Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. Today we're looking at a true oddity from French history. The peasants that witnessed the assault seemed to be unsure on who or what the attacker had been. One of them said it was a wolf, another said it was a man. Due to the time of year and the late hour, it was too dark to get a good look at the thing, but the speed at which it moved on all 4s seemed very odd. If this was a man, then there was definitely something unnatural about him. Some weeks later, a body was found a few miles north of Dole. This was a boy of about 10 years old. He'd been strangled to death and the flesh from his thigh, arms and stomach had been ripped out. On top of that, one of his legs had been completely torn off and the detached limb was missing. There were now at least 2 children dead, plus a number of reports of people being attacked by some unknown creature, as well as sightings of this beast lurking near to people's houses. Something had to be done. The Court of Parliament stepped in, and in 1573 they made the following announcement. According to the advertisement made to the Sovereign Court of Parliament at Dole, that in the territories of Espagne, Salvange, Corpechon and the neighbouring villages, has often seen and met for some time past a werewolf who, it is said, has already seized and carried off several little children so that they have not been seen since, and since attacked and done injury in the country to some horsemen who kept him off only with great difficulty and danger to their persons. The said court, desiring to prevent any greater danger, has permitted and does permit those who are abiding or dwelling in said places and others, notwithstanding all edicts concerning the chase, to assemble with pikes, halberts, arquebuses and sticks to chase and pursue the said werewolf in every place where they might find or seize him, to tie and to kill without incurring any pains or penalties. And with that, the hunt was on. To explain a little bit more about why this announcement was made, it's essential to understand the context of 16th century France, where the belief in werewolves wasn't just some folklore, but a widespread and deeply held conviction. This fear of werewolves was intertwined with the era's religious and social anxieties. At a time when the country was grappling with the Reformation, religious tensions, and the constant threat of famine and disease, supernatural explanations were often sought to explain any misfortunes. Werewolves were believed to be agents of the devil, often associated with witchcraft. The church played a pivotal role in reinforcing these beliefs, warning the populace about the dangers of straying from Christian teachings and the lurking threat of diabolical forces. In rural areas where attacks from actual wolves were a commonplace occurrence, tales of werewolves were passed down through generations, and any unexplained death or mysterious happening could quickly be attributed to these sinister creatures. A few weeks after this Parliament announcement was made, the beast struck again. A group of people from a village close to Dole were walking along when they heard in the distance shouts and what sounded like the baying of a wolf. As they approached the sound, they saw somebody dragging a 12-year-old boy beneath a pear tree. Now, it depends on which document you read, but this last victim either survived and was saved by the villagers, or he was already dead by the time they got to him. This is one of the problems with trying to get accurate information from a centuries-old case. Either way, it was during this assault that the villagers actually got a good look at the assailant before he ran away. They instantly recognised him to be a man named Gilles Garnier, also known locally as the Hermit of Saint Bonnet. Garnier was a pretty strange person. He was known to be a bit of an odd character. Sabine Baring-Gould, in his Book of Werewolves, describes him as follows. Gilles Garnier was a sombre, ill-looking fellow who walked in a stooping attitude and whose pale face, livid complexion and deep-set eyes under a pair of coarse and bushy brows which met across the forehead was sufficient to repel anyone from seeking his acquaintance. Gilles seldom spoke, and when he did, it was in the broadest patois of his country. His long grey beard and retiring habits procured for him the name of the Hermit of Saint Bonnet, though no one for any moment attributed to him any extraordinary amount of sanctity. Garnier was a reclusive man. He lived in a ramshackle hovel in the woodlands outside of Dole. This was a very remote location, accessible only by a long, narrow path that ran over a moorland and through the forest. Garnier spent many years of his life alone in his shack, barely making contact with the outside world. Shortly before the attack started, he had somehow managed to meet a woman and marry her. The woman's name was Apolline, and they started a small family together in his hovel. Gilles Garnier and his wife were quickly arrested and interrogated. Initially, Garnier protested his innocence, but under further interrogation he eventually broke down and confessed all. What he told his investigators was extremely shocking. Garnier had lived a solitary and meagre life, but had mostly managed to scrape by up until he took a wife. Now, with a growing family and extra mouths to feed, he had found it increasingly difficult to put food on the table. One night he was wandering in despair through the forest looking for something to forage when a strange spectral figure appeared before him. This, it would turn out, was the devil in the form of a man. The figure promised Garnier riches and wonders and a method to put enough food on his table to feed his entire family. He gave Garnier a special ointment which, when rubbed on the body, would transform him into a wolf, a leopard or a lion. As wolves were common in that area, Garnier would most often assume that form. His transformation, he said, was both physical and mental. When in the form of the beast, he lost all human compassion and he became overcome with an insatiable hunger for flesh. He also admitted that he felt no remorse whilst in the form of the werewolf, but upon returning to his human state, he became filled with a great dread and an enormous sense of guilt. His first victim had been a young boy who he attacked whilst the child was gathering firewood. Garnier, in the form of the beast, tore at the boy's throat and devoured parts of his flesh before fleeing into the forest. Later on, still in the form of a wolf, he stalked a young girl for several hours before pouncing on her. After strangling the girl to death, he dragged the body into the woods and there he ate her flesh. After this kill, he removed chunks of her flesh and took it home for his wife to eat. From then onwards, he continued to roam the countryside, attacking children and devouring them whilst also providing fresh meat for his family. He most often took the form of the wolf, but sometimes, as in the case of his final attack where the villagers were able to identify him, he would be in human form. all of these details he readily confessed. Apolline, Garnier's wife, was also interrogated and she also confessed. She admitted to consuming the human meat that Garnier brought home for her. The authorities searched Garnier's home and they found blood-stained clothes as well as chunks of human flesh. To add more weight to their confessions, at least 50 people came forward as witnesses at Garnier's trial. People claimed to have had seen an unnaturally large wolf with a human-like face that closely resembled Gilles Garnier. Others claimed to have seen him acting suspiciously very close to locations where these wolf attacks had taken place. With the confessions plus the testimony of the witnesses, Gilles Garnier was found guilty of multiple murders, cannibalism and lycanthropy. For his crimes, on January the 18th, 1574, he was dragged on a hurdle to a place of execution. There he was burned alive at the stake, and then his ashes were scattered to the winds. As far as I can tell, there aren't any records that mention what happened to his wife and children, but we do know that his house and all of his belongings were sold off to pay for his own execution. So, was Garnier really a werewolf? Why would he confess to such a thing when the punishment was so terrible? Well, what I haven't mentioned yet is that his interrogation was, quite heavily enhanced, if you know what I mean. It was only after he'd been severely tortured for many hours that he admitted to all that werewolf stuff. Homion Sidki, in his book Witchcraft, Lycanthropy, Drugs and Disease, describes the extreme lengths that authorities of that time would go to extract confession from people. Basically, as soon as someone was accused of being a witch or a werewolf, they would do anything they could to make them admit to it. As well as being stretched on the rack, the accused might be suspended from the ceiling by their arms until their shoulders dislocated, or they might have their feet held over burning hot coals until the skin on their soles cracked and blistered. They would even sometimes force the accused to drink powerful hallucinogenic brews, which caused them to become so delusional that they might actually believe that they were guilty of their crimes, whether they were or not. Exactly what methods were used against Gilles Garnier we don't know for sure, but we do know that he was tortured, and this makes his confession somewhat unreliable. Was he confessing because he's guilty, or was he confessing to make the torture stop? It could be, and some people have theorised this, that he actually believed that he was a werewolf. There is a medical condition known as clinical lycanthropy, and this is pretty well documented. Sufferers of this delusion believe that they can transform into, or have already transformed into, a wolf-like creature, and they'll display behaviours consistent with the animal that they believe themselves to be. Cases of clinical lycanthropy are still reported today and have occasionally been linked with murders. For example, the case of Austin Harroff. He killed 2 people, believing himself to be a half-man, half-dog creature. He was found by police eating the face of his final victim and growling like a dog. There's also the matter of the witnesses, especially those who claim to have seen a wolf with the face of Gilles Garnier. How is that explained? Today it's often cited as an example of mass hysteria, a public whipped up into a frenzy by very real and disturbing attacks on children. This panic mixes with their own superstitions and folklore beliefs, and they begin to imagine that they'd seen some kind of man-wolf creature roaming the countryside. It could also be that people already believed Garnier to be guilty, and therefore they embellished their testimonies to ensure that he was convicted. There's also, I guess, the possibility that Garnier really did meet the devil and gain the ability to transform himself into a wolfman. I mean, it's probably a bit out there, but I do like to consider all possibilities, no matter how outlandish they might sound. There are people out there who claim to have seen some sort of half-man, half-wolf type creature whilst exploring remote locations. I've listened to quite a few testimonies, and they honestly don't all sound like crackpots. The researcher Paul Sinclair has made an entire documentary about people who have seen these dogmen in the forests of North Yorkshire in modern times, and some of those cases are very compelling. So, is there some truth to the werewolf phenomena? I gotta say, I'm open-minded, but in the case of Gilles Garnier, it might be stretching it a little bit. From what I know of witch trials from that era, a lot, if not all, confessions that were extracted under torture were most likely completely false. It does seem like Garnier did kill some of those children, and given that he was witnessed in the act of strangling his final victim, I don't think this was the case of a completely innocent guy being the victim of mass hysteria. It has been theorised that some of his victims might actually have been children that were killed by wolves, and Garnier just happened to come across their bodies, and he was so hungry that he decided to cannibalise their remains and take some home for his wife. Either way, it's pretty grim. The events of this case have been told, retold, re-examined and reinterpreted many times over the centuries, and a lot of details get obscured, and getting to the truth of the matter becomes increasingly impossible. I mean, look at this. One of the books I was reading as research claims that Garnier's trial began in 1572, whilst also claiming that the last kill happened in 1573. How could he kill someone whilst he was on trial? I don't know. Probably a typo, but it shows how the facts can get jumbled up over time. What I've tried to do in this video is to consult various sources and piece together some sort of consensus as to what actually happened, but even so, the amount of claimed victims and the actual order of these events varies wildly from source to source. So if you wanted to research this case for yourself, I definitely recommend consulting as many different sources as you can. Anyway, I hope you found my attempt at putting this story together interesting. Thank you for watching, and thank you as always to the supporters who help keep things running. If you want to see videos ad-free and 24 hours before they go up on YouTube, then check out my Patreon. I also sometimes put up uncut versions of videos that I have to edit a little bit to get on YouTube. Alternatively, if you want to support the channel, you can just drop a like and a comment on the video. It really helps me out and it's free to do, so why not? Until next time, goodbye.